drive.
I do. I love attention.
It's amazing.
Things got my attention though. Like, this is great. Yeah. Maybe I'm not a real writer because I just love attention.
Whatever.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone as you all filtered into our lovely virtual space here this evening. We are absolutely delighted to have you join us for our live virtual event with Kelsey Sather for her new book, Birth of the Anima. We're so excited to have Maggie Sleepian along with her to chat about this wonderful book. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on all the good things happening at Country Bookshelf, and follow us on Eventbrite so that you don't miss the next great Country Bookshelf event. Before we get to our speakers this evening, I do want to point out a few things about our virtual space. You can purchase a copy of The Birth of the Anima at Country Bookshelf. I'll be dropping a link for that into the chat here in just a moment. We are recording this event, so if you have to leave early or you came late, feel free to check that out on the Country Bookshelf YouTube channel. If you have any questions for our panelists this evening, you can leave them at any time. Just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll get to those as time allows. You can also drop them in the chat as well as you like. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we do recommend exiting and re-entering the webinar. If that doesn't fix the problem, I'd recommend checking out that YouTube stream. Sometimes it's just a little easier for those folks joining us on a browser. If you have any sound issues, we do recommend switching to headphones. I don't know why that works, but it usually will fix the problem. So we do want to acknowledge that we are currently occupying the ancestral unceded land of the Salakee Crow, the Salish Kootenai, Cheyenne, Shoshone, Bannock, and Oceti-Sakowin peoples. We encourage you to learn about, those of you joining us from outside Bozeman and Montana, to learn more about the land that you occupy and the stories of its people. I also want to remind you that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone that's joined us this evening. We ask that you be respectful, and those submitting offensive or inappropriate comments will be dismissed. Kelsey Sather lives in Montana. Her stories explore the complexities of human nature and interconnections. When she's not writing, she can usually be found in the mountains. Maggie Sleepian is a Bozeman-based writer and cat lover who has backpacked thousands of miles on trails across the country. Her work focuses primarily on backcountry recreation and the relationship to the outdoors. She has written about mental health in endurance athletes, protections for national monuments, and accurate portrayal of the outdoor experiences in media. Maggie's writing has appeared in Huffington Post, Outside, and Backpacker. So without further ado, Kelsey, Maggie, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks everyone for joining.
Hello. We're so happy you're here. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, first, congrats on your amazing book and having it published and out in the world. How scary, but amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's exciting.
Obviously. I want, first of all, for people who haven't read it, can you give us a summary of Birth of the Anima?
Yeah. The overarching story follows a lineage of 12 women who transform to have the powers of apex predators. So they're super strong and fast, and they're able to communicate with other animals. When they transform, they also inherit the task to restore ecological order to the world. They step into that task with an army of shapeshifters, mages, and commoners, which are humans that have no natural born magical talents. And that's the overarching story. Birth of the Anima happens in parts, and the main storyline is the birth of the final anima, the 12th anima.
Lovely. And this is fantasy, magical realism. What category umbrella do you fall under here?
That's a great question. I feel like it happens on a spectrum, fiction with, realistic fiction on one end and then epic fantasy on the other. Mm-hmm. And the world Alagaea that the book takes place in mirrors back our own, and that was an intentional mechanism of the book because we're exploring themes that we're exploring in our own lives right now in the book. And so I would say fantasy, and that's what the genre I went with, but it's more magical realism in some ways as well.
Okay, so relatable, it's not completely in the fantasy realm.
Yeah, there's no orcs.
Okay.
We're not going with those like fantastical tropes.
Yeah.
But there are shapeshifters and these other fantastical elements.
Lovely.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. Tell me about the idea. This is a huge book and a huge project. Where did this idea stem from?
Yeah, when I was a graduate student in Utah, I was studying environmental humanities, and a lot of my coursework was depressing.
Yes.
Yeah, because reckoning with the ecological crisis that we find ourselves in, I felt this huge loss of something that we're drifting further away from as humans. And it's something sacred, and it's something vital for the survival of our species, not to mention the other species we're sharing this planet with. And so in that exploration of despair, I wondered what it would be like if humans had continued evolving as animals and we were actually really immersed in our animal selves. And that's where the concept of the anima came from. It was a tiny seed, but over the next 8 years, it grew into something that I had no idea that it was going to become that. But that's the question that started the book.
Okay. And then it ended with this total immersion in this world that you created.
Yeah. It just like, boom, exploded.
No, that makes sense. Did the drafting process. So can you explain the writing process start to finish? I know the first draft looked a lot different from the last draft. Do you outline? Is your book character driven, voice driven, narrative driven? How does this happen for you?
Oh man, it was a learning process. And because I studied nonfiction mostly in my undergrad and graduate studies. And so, but I've always loved fantasy. Like in high school, I was so into Lord of the Rings that I tried to clothespin my ears so I could look like an elf.
In high school?
No, middle school.
No, it was high school.
I mean, I just always loved fantasy. And so the other thing that's really cool about fantasy is that we can enter into complex, emotionally triggering issues in a way that's playful and curious. There's a disarming effect when we step into fantastical stories.
Okay.
It's why I think as children, we learn some of these moral codes through fairy tales, because we're better able to internalize when someone says, don't go with the strange man in the car. Yeah. It's like for kids, sometimes it's hard to connect it, but if you tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood, there's almost something more that clicks. And that kind of fantastical storytelling we've had for millennia. I mean, it's almost as human as clothes and eating. So I knew that I wanted to write a fantasy story. And after I graduated and I finished my thesis, which was a collection of essays, I started right away on that question that I wrote down in my journal. So it
had been living as a seed in your head?
Yeah, and I would I always wrote in journals, ever since I was a little girl. And so during my graduate studies, I would write little vignettes or little explorations of this character, Elle. Okay. Like Elle was the first person I met from Birth of the Anima.
I love that term, met.
Yeah, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the characters are very real to me. And so I was just getting to know Elle in the beginning. And then once I graduated, I fully immersed into the storytelling. And I sat down at my desk every day. I'm a morning writer. And so the logistics are pretty simple. You sit down at your desk and you show up. But what happens is magical with fiction. And like I said, I was trained in nonfiction. So that experience of discovery was mysterious and exciting and intoxicating, and I would leave those morning sessions just feeling high.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the writing process. So the first draft of the book happened 2 years after that, and I was a pretty young new writer, obviously, and so I was just really eager to like, get a book done and get out in the world, because people ask you, you know, what do you do? And you're like, well, I do blah, 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 and I also write, because most writers work like 5 jobs while they're writing. And then they would ask, like, what's the book about? And so all of a sudden I was having this conversation about the book in the external world, and I felt a lot of pressure on myself to show that I was creating something or show that something was coming from this. So I kind of sprinted to the finish line and wrote this novel that was 120,000 words, had to read it, had a couple other people read it, was like, this is my grand debut as an author, it's amazing. And then my husband was the one who told me that he was brave, and he was like, this book isn't good.
So, okay. So I don't think you could call it a beta reader, because that's when I read this, right? So I read Kelsey's first draft, chapter by chapter, and offered feedback in each chapter, and went through the whole process over months. I think we did this years ago. And then she goes dark for a while, and then asks me to go to dinner at Plonk out of the blue. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. Yeah, you can buy me a cheese board. And she sits me down with a glass of wine and a cheese board and says, is my book bad? I was like,
you're like, where's the exit?
Yeah, exactly. Like, smoke bomb, like, take the cheese board and run. But yeah, it was so different from this draft that I read. Totally. So you scrapped a lot of it.
Yeah, so what happened is once, you know, with Jared, I was like, bad? What do you mean? It's amazing. I'm amazing. And then I think there's that process as for young writers that we need to go through, where we recognize that there's no perfect to achieve. There's only effort and growth and learning. And what I learned through that is that the first draft, more often than not, is the author discovering what the story's about. And that's what that first draft was. I just was discovering what the story was about. And the reason why it wasn't a good book is because it read like a synopsis, because it was a synopsis.
Okay.
And so what I did in the following 5 years was go back into the cave, which I endearingly call the writing process, because it very much feels like this removal from the world in a way, and just like to go inward, and I dug really deep. And I realized that I needed to do the classic creative writing adage, show, don't tell. And so I went back in history in this book and wrote all the Anima stories.
Okay.
Leading up to the final Anima, because the first draft was just the final Anima. Yeah. And so what happened with that first draft of the novel is that 120,000 words became 20,000 in this book. So it was pretty much a whole book that I scratched. And that 20K words became 2 chapters in this book. And so it really goes to show how much below the iceberg is happening in any book, because obviously all that effort, it's not wasted, but it wasn't part of the final product.
Yeah, but it created the world though, didn't it?
Totally.
And so do you think that you could have wound up with this if you hadn't written those extra 100,000 words?
Absolutely not. I mean, I had no idea what I was writing. And so that's the mystery, is that you don't really know what's going to happen. Or at least for me, that's my process.
Yeah.
And so that kind of is a nice segue into the second part of your question about how I approach the writing process in general. So some people will use outlined, like, chapter by chapter synopsis so they know where they're going, and I can totally see why that would be advantageous.
Yeah.
But what I find works for me is that first I get to know my characters as well as possible. And then they who they are and the decisions they make actually create the plot.
Okay, so you're writing, and do you not know what's going to happen every time? This is an actual real question, because I write in a totally different way.
Yeah.
So when you sit down for a 3-hour writing session, because I feel like you're very disciplined with your writing schedule. So you sit down for a 3-hour writing session. Do you have the scene in your head? Do you have a starting and ending point, and you don't know what's going to happen in between? Or is it just a free-for-all with your characters when you sit down?
It just depends on the character I'm working with, because if I know that character's backstory really well, then I can sit down and say, all right, I know this character ends up in this place with this person at this time. So I'm going to get her there.
Okay.
Kelsey?
If it's a new character, it takes a while for me to know that person and know what she's motivated by and what decisions she would make. And so that's more exploratory. That's when I don't really know what's going to happen, because characters are surprising. Yeah.
Kelsey, can I jump in really fast?
Yeah.
Sorry, it sounds like maybe one of the speakers or the microphones that you were using may have cut out.
Oh, let's try this.
Can we hear you now? Sorry, you just got really quiet there for a second. I didn't want to lose your answer.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, hopefully
Thanks,
we didn't
everyone.
lose too much. Sorry, we just got going there. So we're good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, do you want to reiterate? Oh.
Okay.
Let's reiterate a little bit about the character-driven writing process, just in case we missed any with the mic cutting out.
I was just saying that it's in my process, it's really important to get to know a character as a fully fleshed human being with his or her their own wants and needs and motivations, their own agenda, and then their decision making makes the plot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you avoid not getting totally lost in I mean, you wound up with a really big book.
Yeah.
But it never felt like we were running away with the plot. Do you think that having that braided structure helped, or does it keep it self-contained?
I have a binder that's like this thick with all the character explorations, all their timelines.
Oh wow.
How their timeline relates to the world timeline. And then, because the world has its own history with its own events. So each character, especially for shapeshifters, which have been around for 9 millennia, they have a lot of things that happened in their lives, obviously. And so, but I make sure that they line up with the world history. And in that way, not unlike how we live, our personal timelines intertwine with like the more societal, political timelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very complicated.
Yeah, but the weird thing is my brain thrives with that expanse. I don't know.
Do you ever, this is kind of off on a tangent, do you ever feel like you're living in 2 different worlds because you created an entire world and mapped it and wrote its history and gave it names? Do you feel like you have a foot in both worlds as the creator of this world?
I do at times, but honestly, I've been really deliberate in making sure that this world mirrors back our own in really tangible ways. And so it doesn't feel so much like a foot in one and a foot in the other, as much as like I'm standing here and there's a mirror that I'm looking into, like a funhouse mirror.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm very much in our world and writing about our world, but I'm doing it through this portal so it doesn't feel like I'm getting torn apart, but rather like, expanding my reality in that way.
Cool. Okay, that's where the magical realism.
Yeah, magical realism.
Totally.
Fantastical realism.
Fantastical
Let's
realism.
start a new genre.
You can. Let's talk to you about it. Okay, so there are different themes, braided themes in this book. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between environment, feminism, empowerment, all these woven together? Was it metaphorical? Was it an allegory? Is it just trying to help people connect?
Yeah. Well, in my graduate and undergraduate studies, I was really fascinated with this concept of ecofeminism and the earth concept as this feminine force. And I explored that more in reading about spirituality, and then just through my own like psychology. And so there's been a lot of nonfiction reading that have gone into this book, because I do think that there is this really intricate and important interconnection between like the experience a woman has and has had historically and what the earth is experiencing. And that is, extraction, fragmentation, loss of sense of self, through an agenda, an external agenda, a sense of powerlessness. And so and this is as a white woman speaking, I think for BIPOC women, that experience is even more layered. And so and that's why there's so many BIPOC characters in my book, because to speak about oppression of nature and a woman, it's really important to also speak about oppression of BIPOC, the BIPOC experience.
Okay, and as a white woman writing these incredibly varied, diverse characters, both with, kind of in any category you can think of, what was it like to write about these historically marginalized groups, whether it's sexual orientation or skin color? What does it mean to you to write about that as a white woman?
It required a lot of research, listening, and doing my best to better understand those experiences, knowing that I'm going to make mistakes. Any author that writes outside of his, her, their own experience is going to make mistakes. But I don't think that means that we shouldn't try, because that act of imagining another person's experience and actively learning about it is empathy, is imagination in action. And I think that if we can do our best and knowing we're going to make mistakes, listen to the feedback, learn and grow and try better next time, I think that not only makes us better writers, but better humans. And so it's definitely scary. I mean, the cancel culture is out there, and that's a scary thing for authors these days. But I think it's important that we continue to try to imagine experiences beyond our own. And also, I mean, like, I didn't want to write another Middle Earth. I mean, I love Tolkien's work. We don't need another Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire. I started this novel, and from the very beginning, I knew I wanted the women to be diverse. And that's because we live in a diverse world.
You created a world that mirrors our own.
Exactly. Like, white people are the minority, and that's fine. That's a great thing, because diversity is beautiful. And imagine going in a forest and all there was Douglas fir. There was like no wolves, no aspen trees, Douglas fir. I mean, what a sad place to dwell. What makes a forest or any ecosystem beautiful is its diversity. And I think the same is true for the human experience.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
He talks a little bit about female empowerment and agency. So I think one of the things that really, I couldn't put this book down. I think I had it in a binder, a 3-ring binder when I read it at first. So I kind of just flipping the pages. I read it in just a couple days. And to me, the idea of a woman having the characteristics of an apex predator was almost invigorating. It's like I can't even let myself think about what a world would be like where women had that kind of power. Because I feel like historically, even as, a very privileged white woman myself, we're automatically in a different category as women.
For sure. It's funny you bring that up, because just this morning I was at this mixed martial arts class. And ever since I started taking that class, I just feel more equipped when I go out in the world as a woman, because 9 out of 10 times when I go out running, I have a scary experience. And it's not because one time this man tried to sexually assault me, but it's not always that physical. It's just the energy that sometimes, like, cars will slow down, and it's scary. But having this MMA under my belt, I've started being like, yeah, bring it on. Come at me.
That what it would be like.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But so for the reason why the anima are women, or one of the reasons, is just because imagine as women if we could fully be the lioness, you know, or the she-wolf. Because I mean, the alpha wolf female in a pack, like she's in charge. Yeah, and she's strong. And so I'm not sure evolutionary what happened for women, like why we're generally weaker. I don't think that's always the case. But I wanted to explore, it's kind of like I just read Margaret Alder's The Power.
I was gonna bring that up. It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And those women get this new power and it totally flips the dynamic, the gender dynamic. And while that happens a little bit in my book, it was more so an exploration of like the human body and what we're capable of doing, because it's fantastic. Male, woman, non-binary, whatever. Your body can do amazing things. And that was something that was really important for me to highlight in the book, is that we are animals with these awesome bodies that are able to do wonderful things for us. And it's really important to remember that and honor it, because being an animal and having this whole animal kingdom as kin is, I mean, it's such a gift.
And so you created a world where where the humans can still be more connected to that.
Exactly, because that's something that I feel like we are forgetting. And I think it creates loneliness. In the human experience.
We're cut off from the natural world.
Yeah, and in that disconnection and alienation from the natural world, we forget that we're always part of something that's so big and intricate and beautiful and epic. It's always there for us, but the more that we forget that and move away from it, the more likely we are to act in ways that degrade it. So yeah.
That kind of ties back to empathy and understanding. And
Exactly.
The more you can relate to, the more empathy you'll have for.
Yeah, and because that's not only human to human interpersonal relationships, but it's also human to other animal, other life. And having empathy for the experience of other animals is really important for us to remember. And that's not saying, you know, I hunt and I eat meat. So there's something, and that the book really explores that human nature relationship, because there's nuance there. But I think it's important to remember that we are part of this biological community that is amazing. Yeah.
Okay, so we're all connected, but I remember when I was reading your book, one of the things that struck me with your characters was this sense of other. And your present day characters, Freda and Elle, they are both, I'm not going to say they're ostracized, but they are very much outsiders, both of them. And then your Anima, purely because of their new biological makeup, they are other also. They stand alone. I know that I think you want to read some passages with Freda and Elle, but can you explain also that theme of other? Did that come from learned experience? Did it come from, was it intentional?
Yeah, it's funny when you ask that, because as authors, we do our best to, or for me, I do my best to remove myself as much from the story and just be kind of the receiver of the story and just put it through without too many of my personal filters. But when you ask me that, it's true. Like otherness is something that I've definitely explored in my life, and loneliness and isolation. And especially for some of Elle's experiences in childhood, I had some great friends in childhood that I'm still good friends with today, and I'm really thankful for that. But I also experienced bullying as a kid, and some of actually the quotes in Elle's chapters are from my lived experience. Like one of her nicknames is Bones, and that was one of my nicknames because I was really, really skinny, and I couldn't gain weight for a long time there. So the other thing about otherness in relation to the Anima and the Anima's role is that I think having those experiences of isolation and feeling disconnected is really important for understanding what could be lost in the natural world if the current trajectory continues. And that experience is an important part of the empathy piece.
Yeah.
And so for a long time I felt angry about the childhood bullying experience, but now I see it actually as this gift, because it allows me to have greater sense of empathy. And so I think for all the characters, there is that concept of otherness throughout, because the Anima's task is not an easy task, to say the least, and there's some really terrible consequences that come from it. So there needs to be a motivation there that is from the heart. And for all the Animas, that doesn't click, but for the ones that it does, the expressions of it are really powerful.
Oh, yeah, when you say for some it doesn't click, your book doesn't follow a normal plot progression, because for some of the Animas in their chapters, it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, this isn't like a book to like, there's some darkness in it, and because there's some darkness in our world, and to really explore and feel for that, I do think sometimes we need to go there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was gonna say, you give us darkness, but I think what you do in this book is you give us a theme of hope,
right,
that we might not sometimes experience in the real world with what we've done to degrade the environment.
Well, that's just it. So the the darkness gets dark, but there's always that little bit of hope that's carried forward by the Anima's allies. And so this book is a launching pad into the trilogy. It's an exploration of the context, it's an exploration of the world, but in the following books, we're following mainly that final Anima's trajectory.
Okay.
And the purpose here is to give gravity for what she is actually stepping into.
Okay.
As the reader, we can feel that on a really intimate level, because we've lived through all these Anima's experience, whereas for the final Anima, she doesn't have that. And so there'll be an interesting relationship between reader and final Anima, as the final Anima is trying to figure out what this means, what this looks like, if she can do it. Because that's the reality we're stepping into in our world, is that we've inherited climate change, we're inheriting habitat loss, we're inheriting mass pollution, especially plastic in the ocean. I mean, the problems that we are facing today it's really a lot to take in. And that's why I think most of us choose not to. Yeah. Because I actually think there's like a little mechanism in our brain that turns it off.
Yeah. It's too much.
Yeah, it's too much. And that like that's okay. But the main thing about this book that I'm hoping is that we can bravely step into those emotions in this fantastical world, in this play, in order to better internalize that we have the power to do something, just like the final Anima does. And that while it feels like maybe it's too late or it's too much, there's always hope till that opera singer sings.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Can you read us some from Freda and Elle's section?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's
explore.
The characters.
So Freda and Elle are the two main characters, and I wanted to read something here so we could get to know them a little bit. Let's start with Freda. Take a sip real quick. Freda set down her coffee. Yes, well, shall we? He motioned for the check and began to take his wallet out. I insist, she said, placing $1 on the table. You're going out of your way on a whim. Todd looked uncomfortable. The man usually pays. Well, this isn't a date and no one saw, she said, standing. Besides, you can probably tell by now that I'm not a woman to follow usually. He laughed. Ain't that the truth? He pulled on a day pack, Army issued, and Freda put her pack on as well. They walked west down Middle Forks Main Street. The road continued all the way to the mountains. Ranches lined either side. They passed a wolf, shot dead and left in the ditch. Ravens and magpies helped themselves to the carcass. Todd frowned at the wolf. I heard they're trying to kill them all, he mumbled. I heard the same, Freda said, and they exchanged glum expressions. So, Todd said, lightening his tone, you still haven't told me anything about yourself. They stepped into the forest and walked past the tree Freda had slept beneath. She wrung her hands together as she followed him. How much did she tell him? He would be leaving town soon and probably wouldn't return. And it wasn't like the university or family would be hunting her down. She was free to share her story, or part of it anyways. She told him about growing up in Twin Rivers and attending the archaeology program. I didn't think women were allowed to pursue upper education. He sounded curious, not accusatory like the men who had said the same thing before. There are exceptions, like her perfect grade and her father's prestige. Rare, but there. It doesn't matter anyways. I found the university system undesirable. Todd nodded. I get that. But surely a professorship is more desirable than life out here. He gestured to the trees around them. Not in the slightest. Todd looked over his shoulder and, seeing her serious face, laughed. You remind me of my grandma. How so? Well, you're stubborn. Any idiot can see that. And you're strange. But not in a bad way, he added quickly. She agreed with his assessment. They relaxed into a comfortable silence, and Freda decided she liked this Todd person. Little snapshot of Freda there that I felt captured her character quite well.
She's lovely.
Yeah, she's my personal hero.
Yeah. She's
Like,
so weird.
I want to grow up and be Freda. Minus like the solitude, because that just
very alone.
yeah, that's a little rough. Okay. And then for Elle, the day ripened. She pivoted again to observe the town's daily ritual of waking. Cars grumbled on, and the beeps and moans of construction resounded. Twin Rivers had grown in the past 10 years from a small town to a medium-sized city. Since gaining vantage points afforded by hiking, Elle had witnessed the city expand exponentially. Condominiums and neighborhoods, giant grocery and department stores, streets and parking lots mushroomed across the valley. Elle had watched the paving over of wild grasses once widespread. She found herself grieving sometimes for the loss of something she tried and futile to name. Wildness, maybe, or the way of life, or the potential way of life that became more and more distant as Twin Rivers spread without restraint. Nearly all the snow had melted in last week's warmth. The Twin Rivers, called separately the brother and sister, ran parallel to one another and divided the city into thirds. This past week, Elle had witnessed the mountains weeping in the spring sun, releasing snowmelt into tributaries pouring out of the mountain recesses. She liked to imagine this annual purging as a shedding of skins. She saw parts of herself melt away, flowing into the rivers, gaining force until the collective energy united with one giant pulsating body. And I feel like that passage is a little melancholic, like Elle is, and shows how both of these women have this innate connection to nature that we all have.
The town sounds familiar.
Yes, it does.
That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
And that stayed the same, not the same, but essentially the same from first draft until here.
It did.
Yeah, I think that was a really important element.
Those paragraphs are from draft one. Yeah,
That.
retained them.
Wow, that's like 5 years old or more.
8, yeah.
Those are 8 years old. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Thank you. In your heart, what does the book mean to you?
Touched on it a little bit, but the book means to me a reconciliation with history and our current situation and the hope that still exists. And it's also means to me magic, because there's lots of it in there. And I think it's important to remember that there is magic in our world, and that it's this radiant life force that's in all of us, that's in all things, and that's always accessible to us, and it's always there for us. That's what this book means to me.
That's good. What do you want people to take away from it? So that's what it means to you. What are you hoping? Who are your readers? Who are you hoping picks this book up? And what do you hope they leave with when they finish it?
I hope people, when they finish it, recognize what we have here and now on this planet, and that it's sacred and it's rare, and that we're losing it, and that we need to act now. We needed to act 10 years ago, but now we'll do. And in order to preserve the beauty of this planet, all these amazing animals that we get to share it with, and we're stepping into a 6 mass extinction right now. And that's really scary. And that it's worth fighting for. And that not only is it worth fighting for, but we have the power individually and especially collectively to fight for it and preserve it. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to live on Mars.
No, ew.
There's no dolphins on Mars.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to get up there anyway.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they have to be mutually exclusive, space exploration and saving our planet, but I think we should be prioritizing solutions to our leading ecological issues.
Yeah.
And that we have the power to do it. We all have the power to do it. And yeah, that's what I hope people take away from it.
Do you want to increase empathy?
Increase empathy for one another.
Yeah.
And recognize that we're all in this together, and start stepping over those divides that we've created between each human and between ourselves and the natural world, and start really looking at it as this collective effort to restore and build upon the things that we're inheriting, which are like, clean air, clean water, like the earth that gives and gives and gives, and to recognize that and honor it and not destroy it.
Restore order.
Yeah, and then also recognize the human to human conflict that is creating oppression for people, and that the oppression of nature and the oppression of people are go hand in hand, and that we need to just do better. Yeah, we need to do better. We need to treat each other better, and we need to treat the planet better. That's what I hope people take away.
It's big, but this is a big story.
It's a big story, and also it's fun. And that's the other thing, is that while this stuff can feel emotionally heavy, there's always play, there's always love and humor available, and there's always beauty. Yeah. So yeah, that sustains me through it all.
Yeah.
Are those things.
You have to have that kind of balance, and the book has that balance too.
Yeah, it's not all dark, but there's love in it, and there's friendship, and that's what we have now too. And adventure. Yeah.
Do you want to read one last passage before we do questions?
I don't know. Should we do questions? If there are any?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions here. I'd be happy to share. Lisa chimed in first and said, "Congrats, Kelsey.
Ooh.
I love the book. Can you talk about structure and how you decided on how to structure the book?"
Oh, that's a great question. What I did first is I wrote all those Anima stories, and then I played around with how I wanted to pace them. And one of the drafts, it was really chaotic. Like I jumped all over time, which happens here, but it was even more. So if you can imagine. And so what I ended up doing is deciding, so the first chapter starts with Avni, and that's kind of a prologue in a way. And then I wanted that to be a launching pad into Freda's story, because that place was the places where Freda goes. And so there was I was looking for opportunities where there was either overlap in place or plot or theme. And so I used the parts to create cohesion in the story, but then also like within the parts, and then as the book as a whole, cohesion through not necessarily plot, but through theme or character or place. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And I feel like that also showcases sort of what you were talking about earlier about that kind of eco-feminist perspective and the way that place is so as important as the characters and their experiences and journeys. So yes. Herman has 2 questions. What/who were some of your influences other than Tolkien? Also, what's your favorite Tolkien book? And then I think the question we're all dying to know, when does the second book come out?
Ooh. Oh, influences are really broad. Linda Hogan has been a huge influence in my life and my writing. Terry Tempest Williams was a mentor I had, and then her writing as well. And N.K. Jemisin, I really love her work. She's awesome. And so those were some of the leading voices and authors that have informed my writing. And then, of course, Tolkien. And my favorite book was The Hobbit. I mean, Lord of the Rings is awesome, and so is The Silmarillion, but The Hobbit was the first work of his I read, and I just loved it. And then book 2, if all goes as planned, will be coming out International Women's Day 2023.
Woo!
Yeah, so that's 2 years from now, which is a lot less than 8 years. Yeah, and I'm not working like 5 jobs, so it'll be good. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, one of the things I was surprised once we finally got finished copies of Birth of the Anima in the store, because you so generously gave us advanced reader copies, which I devoured. But the inside has a map for those of you, particularly Tolkien fans. So I'm curious, where did the map come from? Is that your art or?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I painted that over like 6 months, and I have 7 other maps like that. I just went map crazy. I like painting, except for doing the trees was really a test of patience. I wanted to like spoon my eyeballs out. Yeah, so I did all the maps, and the maps are color coded by biome. So there's and same with these are Sateras, and each Satera has its own map, and I use biomes because place is obviously a huge influence in the story, and so it was really important for me to know what species actually lived where alongside what cultures were there, and the 2 are interconnected because a community living on the steppes will use different resources for clothing and homes than those that live on the tundra. And that's something I really loved learning about, is like what people actually use to make shoes. If they live in the rainforest, well, they don't wear shoes very much there. So, but it was just really cool too. And also for the magic system, because it's plant-based, knowing what witches, shamans, medicine men and women would use based on where they lived was really interesting to know. So the maps were a way for me to know the world intimately, and I really enjoyed making them.
Excellent. Well, Katie asks a question that I was also curious when you mentioned that Frida was your favorite. Was there a character you found more or less difficult to write? So who was your problem child? And if so, what made that character difficult or easier, and how did you approach that as a writer?
The character that I struggle with the most is Elle. And it's like, as I've said, the characters are very real to me, and Elle and I have like interpersonal conflict because I find her really frustrating. And also there's certain qualities of her that are hard for me to relate to because our experiences are so fundamentally different. Whereas Elle's upbringing as a child, or Freda's upbringing as a child mirrors my own, and in some ways. And so Freda, it was pretty easy for me to connect into some of her things. I mean, she's a very different person than I am, but we have these overlaps. Whereas Elle and I we're very different in disposition, in general way of moving through the world. And so I find her difficult because, like I said, as the author, I try to remove all my personal filters. And with Elle, there's a lot of filters I have to remove.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anne Sather is curious if you will autograph her copy when you go to the lake.
Yes, of course.
I'm presuming that is a relative.
It is. It's my aunt. Hi, Anne.
Ilya says, Kelsey, what's up? So psyched to read. My book is en route. I know the book is set in a world that mirrors our own. Is the time contemporary to ours now? I.e., is there technology advanced or set back in time, so to speak, say prior to the Industrial Revolution? Where does it sit in time?
Oh, that's such a great question. The main storyline happens 77 years before present. And so that puts the story in about 1950, which I felt that's where I wanted the main story to dwell, because there were so many interesting things happening there for especially gender relationships and civil rights movements. And so I felt like, and that was before cell phones. I knew I definitely didn't want cell phones involved in my fantasy world. And again, since it is fantasy, there are certain qualities of our world in it, but it's not perfectly mirroring the like American 1950s. But there are certain things, like there's cars, but there's those old like putt-putt sedans, but alongside carriages. And so I wanted that. I also, as far as weapons go, I feel like because there's a lot of war in this book and there'll be war in the future books, I felt like that was a really interesting time for weapon development and the consequences from that. And that's something that I'm exploring in my book. There won't be any nuclear energy in my novels, but there are weapons, like the scale of weapons expands. And I feel like that is a really interesting plot and thematic exploration. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Ilya, for that lovely question. Folks that are watching and enjoying us this evening, feel free to drop a question in the chat or in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Brett is curious. He says, great work. This book is amazing. That's this book right here, just in case you were curious. Brett is curious how you stayed focused and what was your day-to-day writing life like? Did you ever feel like quitting? If so, how did you overcome those emotions?
Well, that's a great question. So I think about writing like I think about running, in that running, those first few weeks are really hard and you're out of shape and you kind of want to quit. But then once you get the fitness, you start to crave it and the runs feel better and you can go longer. And that's really how writing feels to me. It's like a very physical thing. And so right now I'm in the process of getting back into my writing routine. And so, but going back a couple of years ago, my writing routine is very strict. I get up and I do not look at any screens, no screen time. And I meditate, and then I do some freehand journaling just to get the writing going. And I just throw those pages away and then I sit down and I get to it. And I do it for about, my thing is either 1,000 words or 3 hours, whatever comes first. And so that's my routine. And right now I'm finding that I'm actually, it's a little bit sticky getting back into that flow because I'm not trained in it right now. And also I noticed that I've been using my phone more the last 6 months because I'm, I've got this book coming out, I'm trying to be engaged with the community, and so I'm on my phone more. And I really notice that does affect my ability to stay focused and concentrated. So I'll probably have to explore that in the future and see where I can have better boundaries with my phone use, because they are, designed to be addictive. And so it takes a lot of willpower to have that boundary with our technology, but I think it's really important for creativity and productivity. So
I think especially too in this sort of isolationist time, the reason that we can't be all gathered here at the country bookshelf, or I don't know, I'm really envious of this plant-filled setting that you're coming to us from right now. But I hope that the pandemic situation and that isolation is not hampering your creativity, because as you can tell, all of us are chomping at the bit for book 2. So
oh, thank you. Yeah, book 2 is fun. I'm really enjoying it. We've got a new character, and like characters that are kind of on the periphery are brought into the story in a bigger, more meaningful way. And so it's a lot. I'm having a blast writing it.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like that's the last of our questions. Oh wait, no, one just popped up. Hooray! Ilya says, is there a leader of the Animas? What was important to you for a leader to exemplify in this group of warrior women?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. So what's interesting about the Anima and her allies is that the Anima are mortal and they have a human lifespan. And then there's shapeshifters that are immortal unless killed. And so they've been around for 9 millennia. And then there's the salvagers. And so shapeshifters, as the name implies, there's one for every species. They can be a human and then one animal form. Salvagers are able to access what's called hindsight. They can see in the past. They can go anywhere, anytime in the past. And what's cool about salvagers is that they serve as leaders because they have this wealth of knowledge to bring to the task. And so what I find in these leaders, and one of the salvagers in this book becomes that main character, or one of those main characters I'm talking about, and she does step into this leadership role, because the Anima, while she's powerful and the shifters are her army, and she's physically capable, it's actually the salvagers that play these really important roles, even though they're not physically demanding, because they have the knowledge, and knowledge is, as the saying goes, like a true power. Yeah, and they can learn from past experiences and put those forward. And so I think my leaders, in my opinion, are the ones who are able to learn from our mistakes and have that growth mindset that helps us step forward in a way that's more empowered.
That's wonderful. Let's all do that.
Yeah, woo! Let's go.
Well, we are just about out of time, so I will watch for the last few questions while I remind those of you that purchased books with your registration that those will either be available for pickup tomorrow or will be mailed out to you tomorrow. And if you didn't yet get your copy of the book, I will drop that link back into the chat here, so you can grab your copy of Birth of the Anima, and check in with some of our booksellers for some of the other books that Kelsey has recommended. They are staff favorites as well. I also am a huge fan of N.K. Jemisin. So there's more to tide you over while we all wait for book 2. And there's one more question. Lovely. Shay says, so proud of you and can't wait to read. How can we as your fans continue to support you and the release of your book?
Oh, that's so sweet. I am so blessed with the support of my husband, my family, my friends. Shay, what's up? And I think for any writer, the most important thing is that community piece, because we spend so much time alone. And so I think for any writer, myself included, just those dinners, coffee dates, hikes, any time where that human to human contact happens, it's important. It's so important. And I know that's important for everyone, but anybody who works alone knows how especially valuable those connections are. So just that FaceTime, just that, those conversations over food, over drink that's the biggest support that I experience in my life. Even, we don't even have to talk about writing. Preferably we don't talk about writing. We just talk about whatever. Yeah.
Wonderful. Ilya is curious about getting the book from their local bookshop. And that might be a question that I can answer for you, Ilya. I would just pop into Spellbinders there in Bishop and ask them to get a copy for you. But if you can't, we here at Country Bookshelf have them on the shelf ready to go. So you can, of course, call us or email us or shop on our website, and we will mail that off to you. Wonderful. Well, I think that about wraps up our questions and the time we've got left. So thank you all so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure. Kelsey and Maggie, sorry. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all who signed in for our webinar tonight. And do be sure to check out countrybookshelf.com to purchase your copy of the book, of course, and find out more great virtual events coming from Country Bookshelf.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you to Country Bookshelf. Really appreciate all your support.
Of course. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.